Drive safely. Recording started.
A lot of like the movies and culture in the 90s were dedicated to, you know, young black men in urban areas stricken with violence and drugs and gang warfare. I certainly didn't see myself in those depictions a lot of the time. I think it like speaks to something that the most I ever was drawn to a character was a yellow girl with four fingers on The Simpsons, right? Like it speaks to something there that's what I was drawn to, as opposed to say like Martin Lawrence.
Cord Jefferson was always the different one. He was a biracial kid growing up with stepbrothers who were, in his words, full black. And obviously, there weren't a lot of families like his on TV. If he never quite knew where he fit in, it wasn't just because of how he looked, but it's taken him to where he is now, writing and editing for diverse TV shows that would have never existed when he was a kid, like Master of None, with stereotype-breaking, fully realized characters. He just first had to figure out how to navigate a family and a 90s pop culture that expected him to be what he wasn't. I'm Eamon Ismaili, and you're listening to Man Up. On this show every week, we tell honest stories about our lives and investigate where we get our ideas about what it means to be a man. Growing up in New Jersey, I woke up early on Sundays just to watch my favorite cartoons, like Animaniacs, Pokemon, and Invader Zim. And Animaniacs and Invader Zim were both about freaks trying to conquer the Earth. Those are the characters I remember relating to the most, these alien freaks. And there weren't a lot of Muslim kids on TV back then. And Cord, he's a few years older than me. He was growing up across the country in Tucson, Arizona.
When I was growing up, the black population in Tucson was 2%, maybe lower than that. You know, not the epicenter of black culture, as you can probably imagine.
The surroundings were not ideal for someone who was already having trouble finding his place at home.
My dad's black, my mom's white. Both of my brothers are from my dad's first marriage, so I look different from them. And, you know, growing up, I just always knew that I was like slightly different from all of them. I think that made me partially who I am today. I watched a ton of TV. I was sort of a Simpsons obsessive from the time that it first started airing, and I sort of fell in love with all the characters, but I really saw myself in Lisa, or maybe sort of I had ambition to be more like Lisa, maybe is a better way of putting it.
Are you gonna marry Carrot, Lisa? Yes, I'm gonna marry a carrot.
I think that she was very principled, sort of very committed to her ideals in the face of a lot of pushback, not just from the outside world, but also from her family, her father a lot of the time. So I think that I sort of feeling like a bit of an outsider when I was growing up and feeling like a bit of a weirdo really saw myself in that character.
I totally get that. Aliens, remember? Sometimes being the odd one out is more relatable than actually looking like the character on TV.
Because I didn't fully understand black culture, I think that I tried to compensate by leaning heavily into, you know, dressing quote unquote black. So I was like ordering a lot of Fat Farm, like wearing a lot of like hoodies and like sagging my pants, and like it felt like I needed to be sort of like be very outwardly black so that I could feel inwardly black also.
That's interesting. It almost feels as though because you were an outsider based on the way that you looked, maybe the way that you behaved, it freed you up to find different ideas about masculinity really early on.
Yeah, possibly. I think that it's difficult to sort of trail backwards in our life and figure out why we are the way we are. I think that if you spoke to my family and friends currently, I think that a lot of them would tell you that I'm very curious and very inquisitive, and I think that looking up to somebody like Lisa Simpson when I was a kid is maybe part of that. I think that an ability and a desire to be yourself and to live up to your own ideals and to figure out what works for you is something that I walked away from it with.
And a lot of what he was trying to push back on was the expectations of his dad, who had strong ideas about who Cord should be.
I was like the only 7-year-old in the theater for Do the Right Thing when it came out in Tucson, Arizona. My family was we were like the only people in there, but my parents always made sure to like take me to opening day of like Spike Lee movies and stuff. But I think that for me, like I never really totally understood black culture though, because I wasn't really surrounded by it. My dad used to joke and say, like, I'm gonna send you away, because my parents are from Ohio, so he would joke a lot of the time and say, like, I'm gonna send you back to Cleveland so you can learn how to be black.
Go to black camp.
Black. Yeah, exactly. Basically, that's it. And he was only, I think he was only kind of joking.
McCord's father wanted him to see himself as a certain kind of black man. Someone who can take care of himself, chest out, in the same way he needed to as a young man in Cleveland. He was also concerned with implanting Cord with old school principles, which can be a bit complicated for a kid who already saw himself as different than everyone else around him.
My dad is a conservative in many ways. He's a Republican. He's always been a Republican. And so his belief system about gender dynamics and gender roles, and his beliefs about what it meant to be a man, and by that I mean sort of strength, violence, aggression, anger and rage, sort of all of the lessons that I took from him about masculinity just always felt off to me. It never felt like what it actually meant to be a man.
That wasn't Cord's story though, so years later, he started writing his own. First, it was in journalism, but then, a few years ago, Cord started seeing himself as more of a TV writer and moved to LA, where he's been very successful writing for shows like Master of None and The Nightly Show with Larry Wilmore. He's currently story editing for this comedy called The Good Place on NBC. It's about these 4 unlikely friends who meet in limbo after dying, just trying to figure out how to be good. My favorite character is easily Chidi Enegonye. He's this studious and charming guy, only held back by his problems with anxiety.
Getting close here, smelling the ethical ramifications of various soups.
Same old Chidi. Not gonna come back for a 5th time.
Yeah, maybe that's smart. Hang on, let me think about that.
No!
because
No more thinking, Chidi. Just do something. Indecision caused you so much agony in your life.
That is one of the things that drew me to the show before I'd ever worked on it, was just looking at this guy who actually I saw so much of myself in him. I have such a difficult time making important decisions. I mean, I have a difficult time making unimportant decisions too. I have a hard time ordering dinner sometimes. It's like, but seeing somebody who feels that anxiety so acutely is something that, like you, I hadn't really seen before, and it feels great to be able to write for that character because I do see so much of myself in him. I think my goal is just to always try and push past what everybody expects from characters of color. That's all. I think that because of a lot of recent history when it comes to what has been acceptable black art, I think that we've come to accept this sort of stereotypical black masculine character in our film and television. So I would say that if I'm just listing off some qualities that people expect, it's aggression, it's sort of a brooding strength, it's maybe a violence, it's a very sort of like one-note character. It's like often a black man from Los Angeles or New York or the South or Atlanta. It's this sort of very one-note. Exactly. Or the opposite, like a very sort of like important judge, or a very like a good cop who's just like, I'm thinking like Danny Glover in Lethal Weapon. Like, I'm too old for this shit, but he's like a great family man too. Like, it's never sort of something in the middle of those two poles. And so for me, I think that if I have a goal, it's to try to broaden our understanding of what it means to be a man of color and a black man, particularly in America. I think that that's one of the reasons that I love the Chidi character so much, is I think that Chidi he's not what people have come to expect from black male characters in American television. You know, he's a black man, but he's also a philosophy PhD. He's also, like I said, stricken with anxiety and terrified a lot of the time. But he's also strong, and he's also capable and smart. But he's layered, he's nuanced, just like every human being is nuanced. I think that America still has a difficult time accepting that black men and black women are just human beings. And so when I sit down to write for black people on TV, I sit down to try and write people that feel real and authentic to me, and feel like they are
Staying in the
human
car?
beings.
Yeah, have the electric
The thing that I really love to
Are you
see
staying
in
in the
black
car? I
art
have to
is
go in
black
for a
art
poop.
that just
Go on.
shows black
So are you staying in the
people
car?
living their lives
Are you staying in the
and
car,
doesn't
too?
Yes.
focus
Okay.
on like white.
Go on.
As a barrier to overcome.
This is pretty much what Cord always wanted when he was growing up. A black character that isn't trying to be any kind of way, to fulfill any kind of type. What makes Chidi special to Cord is
Couldn't
that
get
he
a hold of him,
exists as a
so
black character, not because of
I
anything
told him
having
he's
to do
gonna
with
have to call
behavior.
me, and I'll just have to
Chidi's
take the
just
call
black.
when we're driving.
It's at 2 o'clock that we said he's going to call you.
I was thinking too.
This message is brought to you by...
Please proceed to the highlighted route. Then the route guidance will start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just called him and he didn't answer, so.
Yeah, but later, if he doesn't answer back, if he doesn't respond back, right? That's a bit much to repeat.
Turn slight left onto Trans-Canada Highway.
What's a hate?
Continue on current road for more than 50 kilometers.
You like him, even though you kind of hate him. It's not that you hate Kyle, it's that you hate that he's on an awesome trip while you're sitting on a bathroom stall at work. Don't hate like Kyle's trip. Book your own on Hotels.com and get rewarded basically everywhere.
said something along the lines of like, this is like toxic masculinity and misogyny doesn't just impact women, it also impacts men. And like, you're proving that right now. Like, you've been deeply affected by misogyny. You've been deeply affected by this idea that like, you have sex with bad women, and then like, it makes you feel like less of a man to be sleeping with a bad woman, and then you need to really check what's going on within your own heart, your own mind, to think that like, you are less of a man now because you've chosen to like have sex with a bad woman. And it was right on point, and it was something that I had never heard before, and it was like a deeply lesson for me to get.
So there's like a million examples of this, but that story just feels so familiar. And one show that pops into my mind when I was thinking about that was Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where he had like this faithful girlfriend character that was the good, wholesome girl who was very loyal. But then he had other girls who were portrayed as, looser and more sexual, and he was always being drawn to those, and that was like his weakness, right? That was his weakness as a character.
Well, baby, why don't you deny your number down for me, you know? Girl, you look so good, I wish I could plant you and grow a whole field of you. Well, won't you approach the bench, please? Yeah, just second up, I'm gonna get your butt over here.
I would say though that in my own personal writing, I struggle against that stuff a lot of the time. I always try to ensure that my female characters are fully realized human beings, that I'm not shying toward my own personal biases of what it means to be a good woman or a righteous woman, that I'm not skewing toward the kind of woman that I think a woman should be, but in fact what a woman actually is, that I'm skewing toward like an actual nuanced portrayal of what women are, as opposed to what I think they should be. I think that the first step is understanding that we are all sort of like full of some biases, and that we are all full of like sort of toxic lessons we've learned, not just from our family members, but also just from sort of, like I said, the things that you just by osmosis get into your brain by being raised in the culture. I think that, I listened to a lot of rap music growing up. I still listen to a lot of rap music, and my mom hated it. My mom hated me listening to rap when I was a kid. I had to hide my rap CDs from my parents. Not really my dad. My dad didn't really care, but my mom did. And I think that like there is something to not wanting your teenage son to like hear people talking about bitches and hoes. Like those words were used a lot in the music that I was listening to growing up, and I'm sure that by osmosis some.
Hey, Paul.
How you doing, Ronnie?
Not bad. I just got you on speaker here. I'm with my family, but just so you know.
Okay. So you missed out on a driving opportunity?
Well, I'm not sure what happened. I told Jeff Yestro to bid on anything that opened up while I was gone. I even filled in some bid sheets for him. And I talked to Kevin last night, and he's like, yeah, no, your name just isn't on the bid sheet, and it's been awarded to 2 people beneath me.
Have you spoken to Jeff?
I sent him a message on Facebook, but I don't have his phone number, and I haven't heard back from him, no.
Okay. Let me give Jeff a call.
Okay.
See if he did submit something on your behalf, and we'll start from there.
Okay, and what if he didn't?
You may have missed out. I'm gonna look in the collective agreement and see if there's anything that protects you, but you may have missed out on an opportunity. Did you inform anybody from management that you were wanting to
Absolutely.
put your name down on?
Absolutely. Everybody knew I wanted to drive. I bid on every single driving position up until this one where I'm on holiday, so.
How long have you been on holidays for?
2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
So something was posted when you went on holidays and it was taken down yesterday?
I don't know when it went up. I don't know when it went down, but I just touched base with a couple, because there's a couple of us that were right on the edge that wanted to go driving, right? So I texted Derek and I said, hey, did they post anything? Because I wrote on there, I wrote on my bid sheets, I'm like, email me if you need me to confirm that I want this position. Sort of something like that. I can't remember the exact wording, right? and I'll get back to you within 48 hours. So all through my trip, I hadn't heard anything, and then I was like, well, I guess they didn't post anything after all. And then yesterday, the day before, I texted Derek, and I said, hey, what happened? He's like, yeah, they posted 3 positions. I've won 1, and Derek has less seniority than me, and Cody won 1, and we're going driving on Monday. So then I texted Kevin, and I said, hey, my first day back from holidays is Monday. When should I report for driving or report for the dock, or what's going on? And he said, yeah, no. He's like, you didn't win any driving positions. And I said, why not? And he said that your name just isn't on that list. Like, so.
Oh, shit. Okay. Okay. Let me look into it, and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
You're back on Monday?
I am back on Monday, yeah. Right now, we just left Swift Current. I'll be back in the city probably 10 o'clock tonight.
Okay. Well, I'll be back. I'm just flying in from Toronto, so I'll be back this afternoon. So I'll start making some calls, see what I can find out, and I'll get back to you tonight.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Okay. Yeah.
Talk to you later, bud.
Bye.
Found its way into my brain, and it shapes the conversations I'm having decades later. The says that when I'm getting angry,
someone didn't do what they were supposed to do.
A healthy sex life.
Oh, I would never get my manager to do that. I got another shop steward to do it.
So the shop steward,
Just everybody who sits
He's a
down
business agent, they call him. He works for the union.
So your shop steward answers to you.
Doesn't really answer, but yeah.
He's higher than him.
I guess, yeah.
This is the top guy.
What it means to be a man.
No, he's not the principal officer. No, he's on the board, but he's not the principal officer.
Well,
TV show.
like he's like in La La. He knows nothing about it.
No, he's just clarifying what happened.
Really, really great shows, and I think that it's no surprise that those shows have often, I think, not even just often, always been populated by women and people of color. Unfortunately, a lot of writers still are composed of mostly white men. I think that that's why a lot of the stuff that Hollywood creates, I'm not going to name names, but I think is bad. It still sort of has a lot of blind spots when it comes to stories about women and people of color. It's because they're not consulting actual women and people of color before they write these stories.
This felt important for me to hear. I don't always confront my own biases until it's too late. I'd already made some kind of assumption about the way things ought to be, my relationships at home, over like projects like this one. I'm really impressed with how Corbin was able to acknowledge his shortcomings. And for him, that was the first step in learning from him, and to make himself a better man. I was wondering one other thing.
No, I think somebody fucked up big time, and I'm going to pay the price.
So I wanted to know whether or not
this asshole now is costing me thousands of dollars. I'm going to fucking punch him out when I see him.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's 77 now. He's almost 80, so a good place and stuff.
I even filled in the fucking paperwork for him. All he had to do was put the date on and slide it in the box.
But he's
I'm gonna fucking lose it on him.
I do, I mean, he likes it. We butted heads for many, many years, and I think that he was just in town actually for his birthday, and we spent a lot of time together. And I think we've both sort of reached an armistice. I think that he understands that I am different from him. He understands that my value system is different from his value system. And I think over the years he has learned to be a little less rigid, a little bit more open to new ideas than he was when I was younger. I think that when I was younger, it was very much kind of his way or the highway. And I think that his older age, he's softened a little bit, which is good. I think that, so I wouldn't say that he's watching Master of None and really walking away with a lot of lessons learned, but I do think that he is watching the work. I know that, and I think that he is sort of open to my liberal ways. First to me. Yeah.
And that's our show. Remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Not only do we appreciate it, but it also helps new people find the show. So support the kid and leave a comment. Also, don't forget to leave us a voicemail by calling 805-626-707. That's 805-MAN-UP-07. Or send one to manup@string.com, and we might feature it on the show. Thanks for listening. Man Up is hosted and written by me, Amos Maggie. Our producers are Cameron Drews and Danielle Hewitt. Our executive producers are Jeffrey Blumer and Rowan Liu. Gabriel Roth is the editorial director of Slate Podcasts. June Thomas is the senior managing producer of Slate Podcasts. And TJ Raphael is the senior producer of the Slate Podcast Network. We'll be back next week with more Man Up.
the spoilers thing is like, what do you expect? Like, is it? I get the no spoilers. Believe me, I'm very anti-spoiler. But Adam, there's like one possibility. Like, I guess the spoiler would be like, oh, which Avenger are they killing off, kind of thing. But like, it's not like you think that the people are all dead from the last movie. The probability of that is 0. Now, that actually would have been friggin' awesome for me. Like, if that had been where they went, like, we can't get them back, it's over.
Yeah.
That would have been
I think we had some folks who were like, yeah, I'd be in for just 3 hours of watching everyone cope with this.
Yeah.
But there's a television show, HBO show called Leftovers that's basically exactly that.
Yeah, I've heard that's guy. I actually meant to check that out, but I haven't gotten around to it. But yeah, they a lot of the movie, it's a very slow superhero movie, actually.
Yeah, like the first third of the movie.
Which I didn't mind, actually. I kind of liked. I would say that this is one of my, in the list of these things that I've had to watch, I think this is one of the better ones, because I thought it was interesting. Now, spoiler alert, I thought it got less interesting toward the end when nothing seemed to matter anymore, but for a while, I felt like there were stakes. I felt like, oh, there's a clear thing, which is, we're dealing with the loss of these people, and it's difficult, and how are we gonna, and is there gonna be a way to get them back? Like, I felt like there's actual stakes for a while. So, the people are gone, as we know from the last one, and, it turns out the hero in all of this is the, like, rat that crawled on Ant-Man's van. I think that's...
Yep. Most important person in the world.
Yeah, in the universe. But for that, none of this would have happened, because Ant-Man wakes up. And I actually like that. Here's the thing, I didn't see Ant-Man, but, like, Paul Rudd was my favorite part of this movie.
Yeah, he's really good.
Was Ant-Man actually good? Because he was funny.
The first Ant-Man is very good, in my opinion. It's
Wait,
on
there's
the most
two
watched.
Ant-Men?
Yes, the second Ant-Man.
They already made 2 of that movie? God, I thought they just did that. Oh, man. Once again, if you're gonna print money, you print money. I can't argue with it.
Shows is the funniest thing. Oh my god.
I genuinely didn't know there was
I know, and there's no reason you should know that, and it's just inherently funny that we exist in a world where there is a second Ant-Man movie, and you looked at pictures of all the movies in order, and you didn't even notice there was a second Ant-Man.
I didn't realize, they blend together. I couldn't tell you how many of these.
And I'll be honest, the second Ant-Man movie is not as good.
But I really liked, what I did like was the idea that, he was suspended in his weird van that does whatever his Ant-Man powers, which I don't know anything about because I didn't watch it, but I could guess. And I kind of like that, like, he was in, some quantum flux state thingy, and therefore he wasn't even really in this whole thing, and so he wakes up, and he doesn't know what's going on. He's like, where is everybody? I think he sees his own name. I assume that's his name. I didn't know his name, so. But I assume he sees his own name on, like, the monument to all the lost people. And, it's interesting there. But for some reason, he's having a harder time accepting it. I feel like
because I didn't bother to change it to Saskatchewan time.
He really can't get over it. He's got to solve this. And
this is Winnipeg time right now.
Travel, of course.
Naturally.
And then,
I believe I called that one thing.
Yeah, I don't care now. But I do like, it would, I don't know how much we need to get into it because it's not, maybe we'll save it for NASA because it's not really about the philosophy for this show. But I did like, actually, I continue to like that the idea wasn't, we're going to go back and stop this. The idea was, we're going to go borrow the time stones, whatever. There's still stones.
Yeah,
No.
stones. You can just say
Power
stones.
Stones?
All stones matter in this case, yeah.
We're going to go borrow the stones to snap back the people. We're not going to go try to stop it. And I thought that was it. We'll talk about that more.
You were sleeping.
But for the sake of the philosophy, one of the components of the 3-hour epic soap opera to discuss it.
Well, yeah.
No,
so
we did not take this road to
we can set aside the whole time travel part. It's just not particularly important for us. And talk about the beginning, where you've got like.
And even if we had, you would have been sleeping at this point too.
With his family.
Yeah.
And then you've got the end.
And I like that. That's another thing I like. I'm trying to be positive about these things that I have to watch. I liked the character dilemma of Tony Stark, I was going to say Ned Stark, but it's Tony. now my mind.
Really similar when you think about it for too long.
Yeah. Tony Stark that guy. Iron Man, I really liked that dilemma of, well, yes, half the people died, but, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow survived, and she's got a thriving glue business that we're living off of. People sticking weird stuff in places. I may be blending parts of it. And we had and we had a baby, you know, and like, I've got everything, and like, it's hard. The dilemma of, do I risk, you know, the Pantera's box of time travel to like reset all this when I might lose something? You know, I've got everything. Like, what do I do? And actually, you know, I thought that was a good, you know, choice by the filmmakers there. Interesting ethical problems.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, part of why I feel I want to push back a little bit on in these whole series is how they tend to end up always answering those questions. So that gets at the issue of Saints that Wolf brings up, and we see it at the end where it feels so, you know, fait accompli. Like, it just feels like, you know, that this person is going to have to make this sacrifice, and there's just something so ritualistic about it that leaves me feeling like, you know, these are here to signal, I think, virtue and to signal morality to the world, and I get a little worried about what kind of morality it might be signaling, basically. So,
well, that sounds like a fundamental superhero thing to me.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think it traces back to like the Homeric traditions and all the ancient like hero traditions that human beings learn how to be good people by listening to cultural stories, and cultural stories, because they are trying to be interesting, tend to be these larger than life heroic narratives, but they then in turn promote a kind of larger than life morality that may not actually be good for real human beings. That's sort of my feeling about it, and it's why, you know, I think you could be a
child drowning in the pond, obviously you would just do everything. You'd jump in, ruin your suit, whatever it was, to save that kid.
Right.
But
60 here.
That's happening every day. And I forget if the point of it is like,
well, there's signs that say 60, fines tripled.
Your clothes or something like that. And like every day that is happening. Like if you buy something like clothes or anything like that, like nicer clothes, something you don't need, anything beyond
there's
your
no work,
necessities,
there's no nothing. They were maybe working here now. They've done it.
Going to saving.
They wouldn't just finish a job and leave the signs up, Mom.
Put a child, somewhere that you're not seeing every day. So like it is happening, but it's our
not a bloody poor job. They don't even know.
Intuitions that value something we see, like one example that we see, more than if you read in the paper, 5,000 people died the other day in some place. That doesn't carry as much weight to us. And there's a definite defensive feeling that I think we all would get, which is like, okay, am I supposed to give up all my money to charity? And I think Singer would say, like, well, yeah, like you pretty much are supposed to give up as much money as you comfortably can to this, because that's the moral thing to do. And it's interesting that we all kind of agree, like, to not hold anyone to that standard.
Yeah.
We're all like colluding with each other, I think.
Right.
And to a certain extent of like, alright, like if you don't do it, I don't have to do it. Alright, well I'll just kinda, alright, that's too far. Peter Singer, that's too far, we don't have to do that.
Right, which is why everyone hates ethics classes, right? Because they come along and they screw all about the system up, right? So, yeah, and I think that is one side of this debate, essentially. And this is a very open, interesting debate to me within the world of ethics. Like, because I do think at the end of the day, morality is about more than just maximizing the overall good outcomes, right? It is also about living a good life. And I know that, caveating that we can debate if those really end up washing out as the same thing, right? Like, there is a sort of classical mode of ethics that was done by both the deontologists and the utilitarians of the, 1800s and 1900s period that was all about this maximizing mindset that said, ethics is about producing the most X, where X is usually some kind of consequence. And one reasonable value to read the Wolf article about moral saints is that it's a corrective to that kind of view. It is in line with the corrective that is provided by virtue theory and care ethics and some other modern ethical theories that say, well, producing the best outcome is really important. That absolutely does matter. But we also need to worry about the quality of the lives that people are living and whether they can be attached in the right way to their projects of work, right? So that's why we did that other episode before this, is that these subjects really closely marry together, right? What Wolf is worried about is, and I think it's a reasonable worry, if you really bite too hard into the utilitarian method, right? You bite down too much into that kind of style of doing things, you alienate yourself from a lot of key projects of work that I think are important for individual flourishing. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, I think for me it's kind of a realism thing. Like, I think it logically doesn't make any sense to say we shouldn't try to be moral saints. Like, I think we should in some sense. Like, if given certain moral goals, we should be doing them. But so for me, I don't know if that's a difference or not, but I think it might be. Like, it's more, for me, it's more recognizing human psychological weakness than it is, okay, let me bend my, moral or ethical theory to account or allow us to,
in order to follow privacy requirements, we can't call our patients by their name.
I think I want to at least...
The lady with the hammer, please
understand. I don't think what we should be trying to do with the moral saints view is just say, oh, well, human beings are never going to live up to this really high standard they ought to live up to, so let's just let them off the hook. Wolf points out in the paper, and this is a really good point, we shouldn't do this from the perspective of we're already on the hook for this very high standard, but then
want to check in Regina to see if there's somewhere that looks like it'd be a good place for us to stop and charge up?
I mean, this is a tension between the individual's well-being.
I'm guessing we're going to want to stop there in about an hour.
That is a reoccurring, I think, unresolvable problem.
Here's where, yes, but here's where I think that causes problems. I have come to believe that human well-being, or at least our perceptions of well-being, are so relativistic that we're not going to be good at ever doing that.
Don't tell me we're getting near Manitoba again.
We're always going to think that wherever we are, the next couple of steps higher are very important to us. And even though they're, you know, honestly, like you and I living in this society, this
ideally, yes, but I mean, we're probably going to have to go in somewhat, find a cafe or something.
relatively speaking, very well within this society. We're not living in a crime. Well, some of us have more radiator pipes for a few more weeks. Yeah, for a few more weeks. So there's that. But you know, we're not in everyday danger of gun violence.
Terrible to fix them up, and they're terrible.
All these things that we could be even in this society, and this society is even.
Looks like somebody just blew a cannon out. That's okay, Bob. Leave it.
Yes.
Time for the smoke.
We're not getting paid enough.
Personal well-being and
time for the smoke now.
Sure the rest of the world is okay.
Making good timing.
Yeah, we're making very good time. I'm also speeding, so.
You know, let's be very good at keeping
I'm fine.
in check and maybe
We stopped for a little,
Yeah, we're gonna stop.
drink and a stretch.
We're gonna stop
for
for
half an hour or so, eh?
creature comfort in our household. You know, I need the room that does the auto, sucks all the crap into the bag. Like, I need to spend money on that. Like, we're always.
No, that one's probably not good.
Things in relative terms in how we're doing relative to people around us. We're going to overweight that personal well-being. And I think that's just fundamentally accurate.
There's a foster park out
like
there.
Do better
Where?
At the Fairfield Inn and Suites.
What side of Regina is it on?
No, I'm sympathetic to that. And then to bring it back around to the Moral Saints specifically, I think Wolf's concern.
It's
why
on
I
that
think
side.
hers is more than.
So the north side?
Maybe like 2-3 blocks in Regina. Huh? South side, yeah.
What's on the north? That side is the north side.
North side,
Yeah.
it'll be on the north side.
Pattern of, you know, like.
The ones on the
And what else? Look in Apple Maps. What else is around there? If there's like Tim Hortons or McDonald's or something.
There's there's a girls' kitchen bar, and there's a dairy
Okay.
queen.
No, there's stuff around there. That's where we'll go then.
Western
What the most thoroughgoing version
Okay.
of
Set it up in Apple Maps then.
any kinds of the Moral Saints. And I want to
Please.
before we run out of time to talk about the different versions a little bit, but like any of them, it seems like
yeah, the one is 2 inns and
really
it's
does
way too
deprive
big.
someone of a life experience. Like it really just seems as addicting, right? Basically, what she says is, you know, you can get addicted to becoming a sports star or becoming the best violinist in the world or something. But morality is even worse because not only is all of culture encouraging you to become addicted to it,
It's an hour and a half wasted.
sort of fall
Not
short
even.
of that.
Not at the speed I'm going, no.
More than if you decide, stop it. That's fine. I don't really care about it.
Oh, I don't have it.
So there is so much built up.
Like this up slightly.
Right.
It's not like, yeah, that's interesting. Well, take us through the different types.
Yeah, no problem. So she mentions either types that relate to, again, understanding this is a
Yeah, about an hour. We're gonna stop in about an hour.
What you got?
as classic
Beef jerky.
ethics.
Beef
So she says there are
jerky.
two kinds of saints that she means, the rational saint and the loving saint. And they're different in how their psychologies are meant to work. So the loving saint, who's supposed to be like a utilitarian saint, maintains their affinity for other individuals, for the well-being of other individuals.
You'll be on the east side of the hotel, the charging station.
And universalizes that. So they become the same by expanding their area of concern this amount of time aside for yourself, then you'll be able to do this amount of other stuff for other people. And like, if you don't put that time aside for yourself, you'll crash after a few years or something like that. I think utilitarians can make that kind of move, but I think you have to be honest. There is a shift away from one kind of maximizing model, right? You and I were talking a little bit before the show, and we were talking about future topics, and we were talking about the repugnant conclusion. And, you know, it seems absurd when you describe the repugnant conclusion from a, you know, like no one would actually want that real life perspective, but if you're being consistent in applying the principles that you were earlier using to like beat people over the head about vegetarianism, you have to be honest that they face these problems if you're really going to put them in those terms, or you have to change the language, which is, I think, the result that people like Wolf would run about.
Don't do that.
Oh shoot, we're like out of time.
Yeah, we're just about out of time.
I think we've got some overflow, plenty of overflow discussion to take over with Philosophers in Space. I want to talk about, you know, maybe bringing this more personally in my thinking, my struggles with morality, and lots to talk about there. But thank you so much for listening, non-patrons. We got to do the thing that we do before we get over to After Dark with our fine patron folks. Let's do what we do every week and talk about what we are going to cover next week.
Yeah, so next week we're finally going to get to Star Trek Voyager. We're going to do season 2, episode 13. I'll post the information about it. It's an episode about...
I have never watched the show, so I'm guessing, if I would take a guess, we're going to discuss the morality of voyage.
That's right, how to voyage ethically, right?
Philosophy of voyage.
I think this will be a good, fairly decent standalone. Like, I don't think we need to watch all of the first season. Like, the same thing that we sort of did with our Star Trek Next Gen, where we jumped right into Measure of a Man. And this one will feel, I think, in some ways similar to The Measure of a Man, but I think it will get into some interesting topics that you wanted to talk about with reproductive rights as well, and how those might expand beyond the human community. And then we'll have covered all of the really classic Star Treks.
And also, what are our top patrons for patreon.com/0G making you say this week?
Yeah, special thanks to Philip Gatt, Speaker for the Dead, Decomposing Snail Rider, significantly less impressive than Sandworm Rider. Super agreed.
That's OA and Philosophers in Space time crossover. Perfect. They found a way to blend the two in a peanut butter and chocolate kind of thing. Awesome.
Some serious timeline blending there. And Aaron is pro-cloning so he can cannibalize himself. You got me. That sounds delicious.
That sounds disturbing enough to be true.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Good times. That's awesome. Nice shout outs, guys. Keep it up. And we will see everybody on the After Dark, who is fine patron, and also NASA. And we'll see all you other folk next week.
That's all for the main show. If you'd like to go to Patreon
millennial saved $100,000 with this.
I'm gonna make a phone call here.
CNBC insists.
Okay.
How to
You
save
can
for
call them.
retirement when you're living paycheck to paycheck. CNN.
I saw that podcast.
It will automatically.
Please say a command.
Call Babbitt.
Calling Babbitt Fata.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice messaging system.
Babbitt Fata.
Whole objective of this popular mode of journalism. More than just generating clicks to sell investment instruments to the credulous, this genre has a distinct ideological purpose: to obscure generational poverty, largely caused by the racism of Jim Crow.
Please say a command.
Call Jason Cox.
Calling Jason Cox. Please say a command.
Call Peter Moore.
Calling Peter Moore.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice messaging.
NBC News, Boston Globe, LA Times, The Nation, The Outline, and elsewhere.
For ordinary people to reject capitalism as we know it, we have to consider ourselves worthy of economic security and dignity by virtue of being human. And, these bootstrapping tales promote a very different, which is that if you're not working hard enough, then you don't deserve security. So, whether they realize it or not, these savings heroes are letting themselves be used to promote a really insidious idea.
The so-called financial media or finance media, and even oftentimes mainstream corporate media, loves the personal finance advice vertical, especially when it's targeting quote-unquote millennials. And they are oftentimes insisting that if they just follow these simple, strict rules, they too could retire by the age of 35.
We begin with retiring early, very early, not in your 50s or your 60s. A growing group of millennials are actually quitting work decades earlier.
With very strict budgeting, including wearing parkas inside during winter to keep the heating bills down, Hester and her husband were able to quit stressful political consulting jobs 2 years ago with very healthy retirement accounts in place.
You would be.
They're not my mates. My bosses. Yeah.
A millennial millionaire who lives in a treehouse. You might ask why.
Even ditching his costly razor.
We were saving around 70% of our income.
Well, next, it's what many people want to hear: early retirement. I have a plan to make that happen. It's pay now, play later.
And do you dream of leaving work earlier than you ever planned in life of leisure? How much do you spend a year?
We don't, but it seems to always end up around $25,000 to $27,000 per year for the family of three.
Plus health insurance in the low 30s. Aiden and his followers, known as mustachians, are key players in the FIRE, or FIRE movement. Financial independence, retire early.
In the past couple of years, this FIRE movement, which is really just a faux self-help platform for financial planning companies, has taken off. And the U.S. media, typically in the form of lifestyle and finance verticals, uncritically eats this shit up. Usually when they come in the form of self-reported anecdotes, young people able to save so well that they retire early.
This isn't just the issue. The New York Times back last fall had an article, How to Retire in Your 30s with $1 million in the bank. The subhead read, fed up with their high-pressure jobs, some millennials are quitting and embracing the FIRE movement. It stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. The Washington Post frequently does profiles of this. CNBC and Forbes especially, though, are really the two biggest promoters of this vertical.
So when you look at the numbers, it's kind of mind-blowing. Forbes alone ran about 3,600 millennial-related and targeted stories in the past 12 months. CNBC puts out a new story on millennials and money almost every day. The woman-focused fashion culture lifestyle site Refinery29 has its own vertical called Money Diaries, which it says asks, quote, millennials how they spend their hard-earned money during a 7-day period. And we're tracking every last dollar.
Yeah, the site has a open call for content. It's calling all entrepreneurs. We want to hear from you. If you're a freelancer or self-employed, we'd love to feature you on our
What you got, Ab?
which is sort of an invitation.
What you got?
Again, use this platform in this really bizarre way when they're ostensibly being open and honest about how much they make, but are just asserting a bunch of numbers which may or may not be true.
Last summer, one of the Refinery29 Money Diary entries caused a bit of an online uproar. Originally headlined, quote, a week in New York City on $25 an hour. It documented a 21-year-old college student's weekly spending. But the article quickly revealed, as Vox's Eliza Brooke pointed out, that, quote, the subject does not actually live on her $25 per hour marketing internship wages. She also receives $1,100 in allowance from her family each month, and her parents pay her $2,100 monthly rent while putting her college tuition, phone, and health insurance bills.
And so this was roasted online. This is the more cartoonish extreme version of this. What we're going to argue in today's show is that this is not at all unique. This is extremely common even for profiles that run in U.S. News or in Washington Post, that when you really dig below the surface of these stories, almost always there's stories about people who are just already rich, who save some money and get slightly richer. There's 4 major problems with how the financial advice works, which we're going to get into. The first is that they're based entirely on anecdotes of kind of superhero money savers, for which journalists have zero way of knowing if any of what they're saying is true. In none of these articles is there any attempt to really verify the veracity of their claims, namely their acquisition of general wealth via, which we're going to call for this episode, mystery money, which is money you get from inheritance, trust, annuities, and other forms of generational wealth, but that is sort of déclassé to talk about, and that most people don't like to talk about because we like to all sort of view ourselves as being bootstrapped and scrappy. So this mystery money is never accounted for because the personal finances are never meaningfully interrogated, even though their entire narrative is based on their personal finances.
The second problem is the net effect of this type of reporting is to turn financial problems into an individual moral failing, as opposed to systemic societal problems requiring broad political solutions. The idea that being thrifty, frugal, responsible, and just determined to succeed is really all that's needed to get ahead in our society and to stay there. So never are the more systemic and structural barriers to success and opportunity part of this equation. This kind of bootstrap mythology with a crafty budget as proof of concept of how to get ahead is really all these things are about.
Yeah, so if I looked around and said we have a society that has $1 trillion in credit card debt and $1.5 trillion in student loan debt, the logical thing would be, well, why don't everyone who has all this debt just get together and talk about a way we can restructure our system or have massive debt forgiveness, right? This would sort of be the political solution. But in lieu of that, we have this individual capitalist moralizing where, no, if just collectively millions of people stop going to Starbucks, this would therefore solve the problem.
Brew your coffee at home and you can retire at 28.
The third problem with this is not only is financial advice useless, as we'll show later, for poor people it can actually be damaging. It can actually make them poor. And not just in a kind of general shaming way, not just in a sort of way in which it stigmatizes people who are poor, although that's important. But the financial industry is actually generally designed, as we'll discuss, to keep people who are poor with high banking fees and predatory subprime lending rates and other kind of exploitative regimes that don't really make sense for low-income earners.
The fourth major problem that we have identified here is the complete obfuscation, if not total omission, of the trillions of dollars, if not way more, of stolen wealth extracted from the bodies of black people who were enslaved and whose labor and lives this country was built on. And so the idea that, now really financial advice can be given, and millennials, we see time and again, millennials as a cipher for upper middle class white people and not for black and brown people. This idea that all it takes is being a little scrappy completely ignores and covers up how this country was founded and continues to operate, which is the exploitation and extraction of wealth from black and brown communities.
Because they don't, by and large, do not have what we call mystery money. And as you'll see when we dig through a lot of these gurus, these kind of savings gurus, is that almost all of them, if not all of them, have mystery money. And this mystery money, which is really just generational wealth, is a key component to all this. And it's a key component to why you have poverty in general. It's important to note why there's been an uptick in all these millennial money stories. There's been a pretty clearly proven and defined reduction of two things for millennials, which is buying houses. Millennials aren't buying houses as much this generation as much as the next one, for reasons that have a lot to do with corollary debt. And two, they're not investing their money into financial services. And there's anxiety from groups like Fidelity or Charles Schwab, even large banks like Chase or Bank of America, which make a tremendous amount of money off of these investment instruments. And they need to market them to millennials, and one way they do that is through CNBC, Forbes, and other kind of financial advice vertical outlets. And that way they read the story and they come away thinking, oh, I can become a millionaire if only I give Charles Schwab an investment fee of 3 to 5%.
So the thing about this financial independence, retire early movement fire, in addition to being right-wing, self-help gaslighting effectively, the way that the media really boosts this movement is primarily as a way to get people to use financial services and their investment products. So at the core, it's advertising. But there's actually more to it. The most glaring point is that all of this is based entirely on assertions by people whose brand is itself wrapped up around their wholly self-serving bootstrap narratives. So, for example, let's take a look at someone named Grant Sabatier, who has received glowing write-ups in dozens of mainstream outlets. Here's a headline for a puff piece on him in the Washington Post. It's this: how this millennial saved $1 million by age 30.
U.S. News and World Report did virtually the same write-up around the same time with the headline, Invest Like Millennial Millionaire, Grant Sabatier. So let's read a section from the U.S. News puff piece. Quote, Grant Sabatier knows what rock bottom looks like. Sleeping in your childhood bedroom with $2.26 to your name. Jobless and only avoiding homelessness by the generosity of his parents. Generosity which they told him would run out in 3 months' time. 24-year-old Sabatier set 2 goals for himself: save $1 million and retire as soon as possible. Well, that seems very likely.
So the article effectively paints a picture of a scrappy, can-do young buck, totally hand-waves away considerations of generational wealth, the fact that he was able to live with his parents for 3 months and that was not a problem, which I know there's this trope we all have, which is, okay, well, you don't want to live with your parents because then you're just mooching and yada yada yada, but a lot of people actually aren't able to just live with their parents. That's not a burden that their parents can actually take on. And so much of these stories also has to do with a very specific kind of familial situation.
Yeah, okay, so you lived with your parents for 3 months. We'll just kind of hand-wave that away. And so we were curious about the details of Grant Sabatier, who had these write-ups in the Washington Post and the U.S. Daily News. So we emailed both of those publications asking them if they had fact-checked his central claims. Neither one of them, both the editors or the journalists, got back to us after repeated attempts, but we did eventually ask Grant Sabatier himself, who did get back to us. He said that the Washington Post did fact-check his 2 central claims: A, that in 2010 he had $2 in his checking account, and B, that he was, as of 2015, a millionaire. Now, we're not really going to dispute the second claim that he's a millionaire, although it's impossible to tell where exactly that money came from. But the $2 as of 2010 is difficult to examine. He says he posted a screenshot of his bank statement from 2010 on his About page on his website, but we of course have absolutely no way of knowing if he has other bank accounts or if he just moved funds around or whatever. Again, someone who sort of takes screen caps of their bank accounts may have anticipated this kind of branding exercise. It's not something normal people do. So here's what he told us in a statement. He said, quote, both of these statements were fact-checked with bank account checking, including Washington Post, who verified my actual investment statements. Also, screenshots of my bank accounts at the time have always been available on my About page since December of 2015. So, the problem with building entire stories and therefore an entire ideology around personal narratives, for which there are dozens of them of varying veracity, Grant Sabatier appears to be more on the somewhat plausible end of the spectrum, is that we really have no way of knowing, and if we we take him at his word about what the Washington Post did in terms of their fact checking, we don't really have any way of knowing really how much money he had in his account at any given time. He claims that he got no inheritance from his parents, but again, that's just something he's telling us. It's impossible to really know for sure. And this is the key component to all these stories, that people start from nothing, and turning $2 into $1 million in 5 years is very difficult. The implication, of course, being Nima, is that anyone can do it.
Yeah.
That any homeless guy who has $2 can, if he invests right, can make $1 million. You know, if he saves well and does this kind of Spartan lifestyle. But the key components of the story are really impossible to verify. We're on the kind of origin story part, we're more or less taking his word for it. So he wants to give this stock advice about savings. Fine, whatever, but he should really lead with his tremendous advantages. That should be disclosed. We should get a sense of really what his real finances are. And if ostensibly reputable publication like the Post is going to repeat that, they need to say, you know, we detailed this and we fact checked this and we said this is indeed true. Because again, the fact that he's white and has generational white wealth and his parents are rich is way more relevant than some arbitrary accident of birth, which has nothing to do with anything. And so when they say millennial millionaire, the headline should say, you know, guy who was born into a millionaire family is a millionaire. Well, okay, that's not very remarkable. But millennials supposedly, yeah, I just if you had to list the labels that are relevant here, millennials gotta not crack the top 100.
So here's the thing, for all these advice columns, the basic facts of crushing student debt and virtually stagnant wages, if not wages that have actually decreased, make many of these prescriptions for, you know, tightening your budget belt totally impossible to actually fulfill. Most personal finance gurus, aside from maybe the most blatant, you know, con artists and scammers, offer advice that is, you know, fairly reasonable for people with already large amounts of disposable income or investments, portfolios or whatever, but are effectively impossible to follow and enact if your wages barely cover your expenses.
I'll give you some examples of these popular blogs. So Charles Schwab has a financial tips for millennials, and they suggest increasing your 401k contributions while avoiding credit card debt, creating a rainy day fund to cover up to 6 months of expenses, and contributing 15 to 20% of your income to a retirement account, which conveniently Charles Schwab happens to sell. You have this very popular website called Millennial Money, How to Start Investing, and it suggests maxing out your IRA and your 401k contributions and investing your money in Vanguard index funds, preferably by clicking on the affiliate marketing link that's in the Post.
Hey, look, it's right there.
Right, to the Vanguard index funds that are being sold. But research shows that student debt, which is quintupled in the last 15 years, it leads to a roughly 33% reduction in long-term net worth. So even when people save money at the same rate of those who graduated with no debt. So the main key component here, which is college debt, is just not really talked about. It's sort of this non-factor, and then the extent to which they try to budget it, it's given short shrift for like, you know, $100 a month or $200 a month or something unreasonable.
A really good example of this was seen in a 2018 profile of what CNBC called a 25-year-old who makes $100,000 a year and is excellent with money. Now, this profile of this guy named Trevor Klee actually came initially from a blog post he wrote on a site called Budgets Are Sexy on November 18th, 2018. It was then picked up and reposted wholesale by Business Insider just 9 days later on September 27th, 2018. Except Business Insider, when they posted this blog about how this guy who's 25 years old and started his own graduate school test tutoring service, which has given him a lot of money, when Business Insider reposted it, they turned the headline from something pretty innocuous to this, quote, I turned my tutoring side hustle into a full-time job that makes $90,000 a year, and I have a 4-step process for just about anyone to do the same.
That doesn't seem like that scales very well. I like the idea that 2/3 of our global economy is people tutoring.
Right, it's like, here's how you can do this too. It's like everyone can follow this advice and become a GMAT tutor. So then this Business Insider repost blog then picked up a couple months later by CNBC and turned into an article itself. And the article is quite remarkable that, you know, it touts, quote, the budget breakdown of a 25-year-old who makes $100,000 a year and is excellent with money. And so in this profile of Trevor Klee, and I don't want to shit on this guy because actually his own blog post is really just about his own experience. It's not about saying you should do this too. It's just kind of like what worked for him. But in his own words, he explains that he graduated Princeton University with no debt in 2015. And he says this, quote, "I had no money. I had savings, but I had no income. So I desperately needed to find people." So let me repeat that. This is from the CNBC article profile of this guy. It says, "I had no money, but I had savings." To most people, that wouldn't mean you have no money.
This is the thing with this, they always do this caveat with like, oh, and I also have this other thing, but that's the thing that's the most, like the savings are the thing that makes it possible. Like money begets money. Money makes money. That's the whole point. That's the problem. This is why these things don't scale.
In this breakdown, the thing that actually made this blow up was an infographic that CNBC posted on Twitter along with this article, and it's the budget breakdown like as a pie chart for what this guy spends every month, and it says typical monthly spending $2,775, and it breaks it out into these ludicrous amounts that only by clicking through and actually looking at how this money is allocated doesn't make any sense, because the article actually details it this way. His rent, which is listed at $825 a month, is only that amount because he has 4 roommates. So that seems to be important information in actually looking at how someone can be frugal. It's like you live with a ton of people. But also a lot of his expenses are shared. So the internet costs him only $20 a month because he's sharing it with 4 roommates. His cell phone is only $40 a month. Why? Because he's still on his family's fucking phone plan. And again, he graduated college, an Ivy League college, with no student debt. So as Libby Watson has pointed out in an article in Splinter, this guy, quote, makes his money by tutoring for the GMAT, LSAT, and GRE. His big innovation, charging more, end quote. And Watson quotes the CNBC piece this way, quote, "He owes much of his success to his own hustle. You can get more money a lot of the time if you ask for it," he says. "There are other GMAT or GRE tutors who charge probably like 1/10 of what I charge, or at the very least half of what I charge. I just charged more, and now I make more money," end quote. Brilliant. Brilliant strategy.
Yeah, and the thing we can't stress enough is just how much of this is about, there's the broader racial wealth gap. Like, none of this talks about how being white, for the most part, there are obviously exceptions, or you yell at me, but for the most part, being white in this country is an incredible advantage from a purely generational standpoint, because so much wealth was stolen from people when they worked for free for 300 years. They never accumulated wealth. They never had mystery real estate. They never had mystery trust. They never had random stocks from some mineral farm in Peru when their colonialist daddy did such and such. And so you have a racial wealth gap in this country, which is shocking. The average white household has 16 times more wealth than the average black household. In absolute terms, the median white household has $111,146 in wealth holdings in 2011. This is compared to the average median black household, which has $7,113. And the average Latino household, which has $8,343. When you factor in debt, and you factor in the total amount of assets that white people have, and things they have. And so there's never an account for that. There's never an account for the fact that this advice may not be applicable to everyone for that reason, which gets to our final point here, which is, I think, really important, which is that for low-income people, these money management techniques that are being pushed by these investment instrument peddling groups like Bank of America, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, they're actually bad for poor people. They make them poorer. That low-income households, if they follow these rules, and there was a piece in Market Watch last year that was actually quite good, which I'll have in the show notes. Market Watch, of all places, this kind of, which is one of these financial rags. They basically said that low-income people, that it's more than useless, it's harmful. And the reason that is because bank fees for low balances are incredibly disproportionate. They have predatory subprime lending rates and housing discrimination against people with low credit scores. So not only is it not applicable for poor people, especially poor people of color, these self-help advice organizations, which again sort of themselves take on a kind of multi-level marketing component, can actually continue to make people poor, because for the most part, the studies show that poor people already know how to be frugal. Like, the poor people are actually very good at being frugal. That's not why they're poor, and so you can't keep nickel-diming your way into wealth.
Right. That's how they've survived. The common stereotype that being poor is just the result of being stupid or impulsive or careless, it's just total bullshit. It's not a matter of having no financial literacy or bad personal budgeting or weak willpower. Ann Huff Stevens, an economist and founding director of the Center for Poverty Research at UC Davis, and who will soon become the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas in Austin, has actually pointed out that people who are living in poverty often do a better job of tracking where every dollar goes than those who have higher incomes, because for those with lower incomes who live in poverty, every dollar matters more for them. Wealth isn't just built by following a few smart tips from a CNBC listicle. There are entire systems built to push communities into poverty and make escaping from that poverty nearly impossible. In 1915, for example, 50 years, half a century after the end of the Civil War, black property owners in the U.S. South held less than 1/10 of the wealth of their white counterparts. But nothing much changed for another 50 years after that. By 1965, black people made up more than 10% of the American population, yet still had less than 2% of the wealth, and less than 0.1% of that wealth was invested in stocks. Deliberate government policy led to the prevention or destruction of what little wealth black families could accumulate. Racist housing restrictions and redlining are just a couple of those examples. Of course, programs that purposefully built assets and wealth for white Americans, from like the New Deal to post-World War II public policies like the GI Bill, for example,
remember
they
there,
often
very first stop,
excluded blacks from acquiring benefits and assistance.
There's a 2017 Harvard study that
was the
found
first
that
place we
401k
stopped.
auto-enrollment plans lead to lower net worth for lower-earning workers and those with high levels of debt because they end up borrowing more money and cut back on loan payments to supplement their lost income. So aggressively
Seems like a
setting aside
lifetime
money
ago.
for your 401k if you're poor costs you more money than the money you make on the 401k.
So
how long
this
is
is
the
just a
drive now,
very
then?
different way to approach these issues than
Says
the
at the
usual
bottom here, right?
CNBC claptrap of
The route guidance will start now.
it depends on whether you listen to the beat.
Continue on
660
current
kilometers.
road
7
for
hours.
more than 50 kilometers.
Ever before, here's why it may not be enough.
I'm going to go and say that the bigger predictor
Maybe sit down and line the grass.
But yes,
and
if it's Bon Jovi, there you go.
a picnic.
Which one is
Have
it?
a picnic.
That's, you have to click through, Adam. You have to click through.
Oh, right. I'm stupid. I thought I could get that information without giving them better.
No, and we're not actually going to give it on this show, so you have to click through. To talk more about this, we are going to be joined by writer and editor Miles Howard, whose work has appeared in outlets such as Vice, NBC News, the Boston Globe, LA Times, The Nation, and The Outline. He's going to join us in just a moment. Stay with us.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
We are joined now by writer and editor Miles Howard.
Wow.
Miles, thank you so much for joining us today on Citations.
Wow,
Happy to be here.
14
We wrote a piece in the outline about this phenomenon, which we really liked. And I want to start off by talking about the kind of aggregate nature of
14
these
Nashers.
subjects that are covered.
How many
CNBC,
you got
Forbes,
now,
Vice,
Jake?
14.
New York Times. They love these kind of savings
How many do we have?
magical savers.
22?
Now,
26,
the most cursory
28, depending if you
review
have
of
wisdom
the
teeth or
profile
not,
shows
right?
that they are almost all children of privilege,
Well,
all white,
she's developing
with some rare
normal.
exceptions. Many of them, almost all of them, didn't have to pay for college. They received sizable
more than normal, I
kinds
would
of cash
say.
loans from their parents. What, in your opinion, does this say? The fact that they can't even find sort of a good one-off Horatio Alger story that's sort of remotely authentic in terms of someone born into poverty. What does it say about the nature of this sort of bootstrap tale that they're trying to tell versus reality?
I think the purpose of these bootstrap tales ultimately is to uphold the idea that makes capitalism palatable for most people. And that idea is if you work hard and play by the rules, you can support yourself and enjoy prosperity. And that's actually pretty much a direct quote from Elizabeth Warren's 2020 presidential campaign launch video. And I bring it up to demonstrate how capitalism is just this thing that many of us really want. Most of these modern bootstrapping tales are pretty much postmodern rewrites of the Horatio Alger stories about those boys who would Fake the climb from rags to riches. Alger was the Stephen King of his time. We're talking
I don't think there'll be an odd number.
Sold, and, you know,
I don't think there'll be an odd number.
The message of those books, the idea that social mobility can be achieved by anyone who works hard enough and disciplines their impulses, is still propping up much of capitalism as we know it today. And you know, that idea has shaped the way we think about who deserves dignity and like who deserves to die in the streets. It's the fuel for these 21st century narratives about savings givers who become rich enough to retire in their 30s because they invest in low-fee index funds. They don't buy pre-sliced vegetables and Whole Foods. But you know, of course, a lot of the savings heroes benefited from undisclosed economic privileges that have nothing to do with their work ethic or self-discipline. And there's a similar disparity between the books that Horatio Alger wrote and how his actual life played out. Because despite achieving this best-selling author status and shaping American culture, the guy suffered from financial insecurity for most of his life. He had debts. He was nearly penniless when he died. And yet somehow the ideology of the stories endured and just been passed for decades. So the savings heroes are basically his grandkids. So, you know, again, I think the
We're still going to try and go through to Winnipeg?
is that they basically pump oxygen into the energy system and ultimately lead to intense wealth inequality, the
6 hours
dehumanization of poor people in American life, and a cultural fixation on work above all else. And all of those things are very convenient for people who are wealthy, but maybe a little bit more paranoid these days because, you know, while these bootstrapping stories just refuse to go away, there is growing consciousness about how the grand bargain of capitalism in America today is actually for the wealthy and has been for a long time. You know, there's growing solidarity with people who feel cheated. But for ordinary people to reject capitalism as we know it, we have to consider ourselves worthy of economic security and dignity by virtue of being human. And, you know, these bootstrapping tales promote a very different idea, which is that if you're not working hard enough, then you don't deserve security.
Certainly had good weather though,
So
haven't we?
whether
Yeah.
they realize
What
it
did
or
it
not,
only rained a couple?
these savings heroes are letting
Rained
themselves
yesterday? How many
be
days
used
did it
to
rain?
promote a
2,
really
3?
insidious idea.
Not
I will
even.
say I'm the laziest man alive.
Never
But
affected
if
what
you
we were
if you
doing.
buy
No.
pre-cut
Yeah, no
vegetables,
shit, eh?
you
It
probably
rained
deserve
when
to be
we
poor.
were
That's
like
the one exception I'll make.
Yeah, and I think it rained when we went to the mall, didn't
That's
it?
the only exception I'll make. Everyone else deserves to be one. That's the one budget beater that you actually I look at you and I go, you make
Yeah,
me
I'll be
sick.
charitable on that thing.
We were eating and it was
So,
raining outside.
Miles, speaking about these kind of
Honeybees.
Must be.
convenient narratives, the common
that's,
mythology of bootstrapping, of the American dream, and
Oh, yeah.
how it goes hand in hand
Paintball.
with blatantly unexamined privilege when it's brought into media spaces, can you tell us about the Frugal Quartz? That is the online moniker of money guru, husband and wife team, Liz Willard Haynes and Nate
I never
Haynes,
really thought there was a
so-called
place called
millennial
Plum
couple
Coulee.
who you have written
We were
about
working
and
in,
who really are very
Kmart.
popular in the US media space.
as I was a
Explain
manager.
What is
And
kept in that story
a
to
lot
make
of the
it
joke
compelling
in
and
the
what is
office
delivered
was
to
that if you were no
So
good,
the
they
Frugal
can't
was
fire you,
a
but they'll
married
send you to
millennial
Plum
couple who pretty
Coulee.
much exemplified
So one of those
the
jokes
savings
would be,
hero journey, basically. They're
I think somebody's
white young
going to Plum
professionals
Coulee
from
today.
Massachusetts
You know,
who
there was a big
basically cook
thing.
their own food, buy
And I
used
thought,
goods,
I never knew it was a real
Real
place.
place, yeah.
And then one day, we were coming back from a trip, Dad and I, and he said, oh, we'll go through Plum Coulee.
In the stores
What?
stuff like house repairs
And you could see why people didn't want to go to Plum Coulee. It was like a little hick town, like 2 shops and 6 houses
And a pub.
and a pub and Kmart.
There is a Kmart there?
It was just a little Kmart, like a little store, you know. It was unbelievable.
It expanded though.
Yeah.
For me,
Yeah, it was funny.
Next chapter of the story.
They have a
Years
big
ago,
grain
2 of
plant.
them
That's the place where they have a big grain elevator and they turn into like a
where
social
they
room.
purchased
Oh, yeah.
They have weddings and stuff like
four-bedroom
that.
house on an estate and a barn and a pond with its own orchard. You know, not long after they left the city and retired early, Liz wrote.
It looks like we're going to catch some rain tonight, too.
That's the bar where like Joy went.
You got your tires on. The all-season tires on.
NPR, Washington Post, New York Times. Liz
You get
actually
winter
published an
tires for
excerpt
winter
from
though.
the Guardian.
Have you got winter tires on?
I've got the article in front of me right now, actually, and the headline says, "Extreme frugality allowed me to retire at 32." And below it, there's this sexy
Oh, hope
picture
it's
of
not long
Frugal
now,
with
eh?
a
I need to
hot-house
pee.
blanket with snow,
Less than half an hour.
Yeah.
Sugars and potted stew bubbling inside or something. You know, it's what many urban-bound young professionals do.
Yeah, it's like the last scene in Funny Farm come to life.
I just want to take her off, but
It's eerily close. And, you know, And I have to admit, I had a little pang for that desire when I first got this article emailed from a friend back.
I wouldn't want to live here.
She said I covered issues that
have you the street houses?
Well, this is Winnipeg, Mom.
Terrible labor.
Well, Winnipeg's not that much different.
Well, the city's nice.
Dumb idea that young people are struggling because they piss their money away on
the city.
And all that shit. So, as I read this coverage of the Krugerwoods, I immediately felt like there was something crucial missing from this story. I spent a lot of time in northern Vermont. I have some friends there. I help them cut their wood each year. Retiring is not cheap. And I also practice many of the same frugality habits of the Krugerwoods, of course. Often by necessity, not by choice. Later. So, and yet, due to my income level, I spend most of my 20s on the verge of poverty. And so did a lot of people I've interviewed in stories. So I decided I was going to dig past the headlines about the Krugerwoods and spend a bit of time combing through their blog and see if I could kind of get some clarity on the fuller story that I felt was missing. And what I found, it was omitted from this narrative.
4 hours.
It was kind of staggering. It turns out that the Krugerwoods actually bought property in the Cambridge real estate market years before they moved to Vermont. And Cambridge is one of the priciest markets in the country, so a good season for buyers. That's no joke. And they still own this property, and they rent it to tenants. That's where a significant portion of their income comes from. Yeah. Both of them were fortunate enough to have also graduated from college without student debt, so that's nice. They also received sound financial education from their families, knowing how to investing for retirement, and that's a huge advantage too. And they haven't shared the salaries they made at their nonprofit jobs, but they have publicized information about their 401k contributions on their blog and the percentage of their annual pre-tax income that they managed to squirrel away. And so what I was able to deduce after doing some pretty basic math is that at least one member of the Krugerwoods is making a 6-figure salary, which, frugality maybe helps, but that's not insignificant right there. Putting all these factors together, that's when I realized, holy shit, this frugality fable that most of the major media outlets were amplifying wasn't actually a case study of how frugality pays off. It's a case study of how being thrifty works best for people who are well off to begin with.
I don't usually like to go. I don't usually like to go more than about 4 or 5 hours.
Pretty unremarkable.
When we were driving here,
probably that was about the farthest I've ever driven.
You drove nearly 7 hours, 8 hours.
Oh, I drove almost 10 hours.
Yeah, I thought it was 11, but I said 7.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you mean baby boom can be well, what's funny is that they the second they build this myth, 90% of which is fueled by this free press that get as much of this financial media.
Yeah, I feel the rain coming.
We're not sure which combination.
Rain is coming.
Then they sort of turn around and write these blogs and then they start selling.
I seen the birds when you had the car parked by
and then they oftentimes will
see the birds coming. They saw them when they come back and they saw the bugs
the sort of sleazier end of the spectrum.
On the grill.
It's basically involved in the industry of making money. Itself is how you make the money.
Fresh
when I was in college, I'd
Warm
watch
buffet
poker on TV and they'd say, "Oh, this is so-and-so's poker coach." And I remember thinking, there's no athletic barrier to playing poker. Why are you the coach? Why, if you're that good, why are you not just playing poker? If you're so good at making money, why are you telling people how to make money? You should be the one making money. And of course, it's just exploiting people's credulity, and oftentimes there's a kind of multi-level marketing or Ponzi element to it.
Yeah, as you guys discussed before, there's this massive fire to people who believe in one of the most simplistic readings of capitalism, which is that work hard and are smart enough and are self-disciplined too. You can, enjoy serious prosperity for the rest of your life. Maybe retire early, maybe own a house for longer. And when the Outline piece came out, it seemed to resonate with a lot of younger readers who were more alive to stories.
Fertilizer
goes in the soil.
Incurred a lot of anger.
Like it's pottery soil. How do they make it?
To get out of the ground. I think so, yeah. I don't know that much about it.
Is it a byproduct or something?
I don't think so.
I'm not kidding. That's exactly what they said. And it's the sort of thing that capitalism feels hard and cheerleaders trying to say about anyone.
Potash. Potash.
What is it good for?
Fertilizer, I think.
And what I argued in the finale of my article in the paper is that capitalism doesn't work.
I think it's a fertilizer, but I'm not sure.
It's not chemical.
Feels like the Krugerwood story.
Well, it is a chemical.
It comes from the earth anyway.
Yeah, I think what the Krugerwoods are doing is more harmful than they understand. But maybe, given the growth of this industry we're talking about right here, the way in which the Frugalwoods have plunged headlong into that, maybe they do. Maybe there is kind of a cynical side to it right here. And I generally want to give people like the Frugalwoods benefit of the doubt when researching and writing these pieces. But, one little fragment I came upon that really didn't sit well with me is in a lot of their press, they often refer to their non-profit jobs in the invitation. And they don't have a lot of money. They have a pretty modest income. Obviously not true. Non-profit jobs.
It's very smart and manufactured salt that contain
You could literally run a multi-billion-dollar foundation, and that's a non-profit job.
Right, exactly. The definition is very expansive. So,
what do they use it
that
for?
was the moment when I felt kind of affirmed right here and actually putting the Frugalwoods in the spot, because I do think what they've achieved is something that millions dream of in this literal sense. But the idea that many of us can retire early to our own Vermont estates and watch our balls is detached from the realities of structural inequality, and it's just frankly insulting.
It's funny to me the extent to which they bury the lead. It's like we invested in real estate in Cambridge. Oh, and by the way, here's how you can save by using cucumber peels. And it's like that Simpsons where Homer's like, I was fired from the AV club in college because of my views on Vietnam. Oh, and I stole some slide projectors. It's like, well, that's the thing. That's the most important part of it.
I mean, on the one hand, I was sort of like, how did this get past the publisher? On the other hand, I mean, a lot of people buy into this, even if they're going to believe Barry. That obviously right there. There is a market for that kind, for again that wanting to believe that of audiences right there. And clearly, in spite of the exposure,
was it in liquid form?
No, it's salt. Success.
It says you can have it in a potassium liquid form.
I mean, the idea that so much of this hinges around simple living, right? The sub-headline of the book, which Elizabeth wrote, is achieving financial independence through simple living. And
mixed with water.
Wealth can be accumulated by simply not being wasteful.
Salt doesn't mean table salt. Salt is a chemical term for a form of something that,
people born into poverty or now in poverty as a result of our system deliberately, which is exploitative and extractive, not to mention.
I think my ass got to speak.
Mine has.
Just the one cheek.
You can rise out of that by living simply and solutions.
This is great for playing. I should have this last night sitting me. Video on it.
A complex system that actively works against people.
Yeah, that's something I don't often hear from people who've actually, experienced the stinging side of structural racist wealth inequality in some way growing up. I mean, I feel like we've had, in the last few years, I've also written some pieces about the obsession with tiny houses too. This idea and how that factors into this sort of romanticized idea of simple living now after, the more decadent kind of expansive idea of capitalism and wealth for a lot of Americans. And I think that when you spin that into something that, is meant to, present itself as a tonic for that structural inequity, you're either unwittingly or intentionally.
I've been driving to Grand Forks on my own now this summer for break.
There, and it's just, and I don't even know how much of an audience
scrap
these days, really, because even though the Frugalwoods have, found their crowd, there is this very, zealous fire community that absolutely believes in these things. Most people I showed this story to well before I published the outline.
My friend drove to Florida and back.
The whole thing. They didn't believe it.
Didn't we?
Didn't we do it? People were asking this.
No, we flew to Florida always.
Yeah, because the thing is, I don't think anyone's opposed to saving, right? Like, saving's a good idea. We also understand that you can't just go around and spend all your money on booger sugar and trips to Atlantic City. Like, that's reasonable. The thing is that if someone says, oh, through sheer savings, if these articles said through sheer savings, we save $10,000 a year, I'd be like, oh, word, that's cool, that sounds reasonable and interesting, and how can I do that? But they're like, we saved our way to $1 million, and it's like, that's not a thing.
And now don't have to work anymore.
Yeah, and now I don't have to work anymore, and it's like, that's not a thing. The thing is, they're taking something that's intuitively good, saving, and they're turning it into this, they're like, oh, I took this food supplement, and now I can bench press 1,000 pounds, and it's like,
well, as opposed to now I'm slightly healthier, maybe.
And I'm like, oh, that sounds like they're just getting greedy. Like, they're taking something good and acting like it's this.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like those stories that, local news stations used to run about, here's a squirrel that can water ski or something. They're citing that, people want this kind of content right here that, offers a sort of mindless amusement here and there, but I think it can be a kind of mindless aspirational amusement. Yeah. We've seen all these articles in the last decade or so about people who were write like, this is why I quit my job and I decided I'm ad agency to go and travel the world for 3 years. How you can do it too. And I mean, it's a kind of porn in some ways. And I think that it's and yet those pieces perform tremendously. They still do to a certain degree. And I mean, you could argue that a lot of the ethos behind how Instagram offers a similar kind of lifestyle pornography in some ways. And I think that it was only a matter of time before this kind of bled over into
right out in the house of booties.
I've seen it.
Did you?
Yeah, it's online.
About gurus like Sue's
I'll go find it later on and I'll send it to you. And I'm going like this, and the wind's blowing my hair, and my pants are down around my ankles, and I'm maybe 2 years old.
Prosperity in life. I'm surprised that the frugal ones didn't come along earlier.
Comfortable having a pay though. Going to Gale.
Yes, and it's like, oh, here's microfinance for like, you have this sort of junior achievement that poor people didn't learn how to save. And it's sort of harmless enough in a micro sense, but really, when it starts to make broad macro implications.
What's the matter with your legs?
Well, because it also speaks to the performative nature of capitalism in general, which kind of relies on the idea, in order to be sold, that you have to come from nothing for your success to mean it.
Right. Yeah, she is, eh?
And so, like, if you start rich, and then you explain how, like, you stayed and you were smart about things, and you had a good budget, and that's why you've stayed wealthy. It's like, that's reasonable, but it starts from a premise that you already have money and you're not working against incredible systemic barriers, which is why you need to backtrack, right? Which is why Trump needs to be like, I got a $1 million home. It all plays into the idea that everyone under capitalism wants to be rich, needs to be rich, and can be rich, but you always want to start out from a...
Don't you hate that when your llama needs a haircut?
Otherwise,
don't you hate that when your llama needs a haircut?
Exactly. Everyone, you need to go to truly, have that sexy sheen upon your story, how you made your money.
Catch the llama first. Give it a bowl.
That's the best way to get books is at the library book sale.
Yeah, now you know now.
Oh, I knew that before.
Right there. I remember that when Lena Dunham had all these criticisms of nepotism thrown at her,
what was that?
Of
course they are, and they're going back into supporting the community.
Want to guard the advantages you had in life right there for fear that it could become the way that you see you. And Crazier story right there, applies to so many different industries and endeavors, and I kind of get it because it does affect that, but at the same time, once you start getting into issues like personal finance that have roots going through our economy, you get into territory where dangerous myth-making really
yeah, because it's totally fair game.
I know it's logical, keep the dust off the wheels. What is it called?
Just the rocks flying out and breaking the window.
Right there. I mean, to their credit, some of the other savings theories that were researching this article were actually very forthcoming. Not to mention it's often astronomical. Usually, we're marketing, consulting, and other
isn't it just?
I feel like people are usually forward about their where they make money.
I'm saying, oh yeah, really just.
Yes.
They think here's my bank statement, but like they'll never tell you.
I don't think it sounds like that. That sounded meaner than a lammer.
It kind of reminds me of the recent scandal.
I think it probably sounds like a goat.
College admissions
yeah, probably like that.
Children of immensely wealthy
I know a lot of us.
Do whatever they wanted to.
It's like a ball, but a
I mean, the very fact that their parents went to this level to get them into these colleges right here, there's something going on right there with the, continuing this myth-making, meritocracy that kids, are going to go through this rigorous educational background to get to whatever glorious future.
I want to talk about the rub here, which is financial. Not all, a lot of it, which is, we discussed this earlier in the design piece that increasing years with the Charles Schwab's of the world, where millennials will start investing as much if you're not buying homes at the same rate, and that this fire movement, to some extent, is astroturfed by these news outlets like CNBC and Forbes that are almost entirely subsidized by groups like Charles Schwab, and these kind of freelance grifters who have passed through advertisement or sometimes not really disclosed promotions and financial instruments with these organizations to what
What do
extent
you
is
think?
really just
I think
a way
she's getting
of
fed up.
getting
Oh,
quote-unquote millennials to give more money over to people to make huge fees on financial instruments.
I mean, we're halfway,
astroturfing aspect
right?
is something that
Like,
I
that's
really
the thing, right?
near the end of my research on the frugal ones, gauging the scale of this. And I think when you talk about that anxiety rate, where I've been standing, I've been watching the conversation about millennials, why they aren't taking these major investment decisions for a while, and it only feels like it's just starting to bubble.
I think we should stop in Regina.
A lot of it still feels like a kind of bewilderment over like
Abby's really getting fed up, and I mean we're only halfway.
And I think more than anything, it betrays a profound detachment from the economic vulnerability that most of are experiencing today due to the cost of living in society, the erosion of wages, benefits.
Yeah, that's right. I want to stop and go for a
I think
swim.
that detachment is a testament to how classist our narrative of the millennial generation has been.
No, we'll be arriving basically this time tomorrow, 4 o'clock.
Talk about student loan debt far more than credit card debt, which is actually more common. The idea that today's young people are struggling economically because they're too self-indulgent with their money. This idea that they're wolfing down too much avocado toast and washing it down with compressed juices. I mean, that's as bougie as generalizations get, and a lot of people still buy into it. But I do sense this slight tremor of fear in some of the messaging from banks and other financial institutions are aiming. I mean, I'm sure you guys remember a few weeks ago, Chase Bank put out that tweet when they essentially play acted the inner workings of a cash-strapped young person's mind. They look at their account balance and they're like, holy fuck, why is my balance so low? Chase Bank, they proceed to toss out tax for a lower account, for a better account balance. Make coffee at home, walk, don't take an Uber, eat the food that's in your fridge, that kind of stuff. And what's striking about these prescriptions for financial security that are now coming out of places like Charles
Throw your stuff all over your shoulder. Mom.
Those little things can add up.
I mean, people do walk the highway road.
That reality
very rare nowadays,
man. The financial sector at last, but unfortunately, I think it just means we're going to be subjected to more banks and financial services corporations doing just adjacent things. They'll be preaching the same misguided reality of bootstrapping savings heroes like the frugal ones have been passing down $500 for the last few years. I think that the scale of the astroturfing that you all mentioned.
How many Busaks do we have?
It'll be quite galling to see the full some of them.
I need to get Busaks.
Now, something you just hit on, Miles, is something we've actually did a whole episode on it last year, episode 38, on the idea of generations. And something that I think you've been noticing that I'm really hearing is this idea that even calling some people millennials as a distinct or actually meaningful way to categorize people is in many ways very deceiving and totally disingenuous.
What are you doing?
And that what you're really talking about, what these stories are really talking about, what we haven't talked about before, is that class still remains
just oblivious.
Incredibly important to discern when financially we're talking about subsets of people and their common goals, their common struggles. And so the idea that these millennials have become billionaires or, millennial money or millennial couple, like that this is somehow a way to categorize people as opposed to, well, what were people born into as being far more important than like the they were born into.
Maybe you should show him how easy it is.
Yeah, because the story that way just doesn't wind up being all that interesting if you're just like, here's how a rich kid stays rich. How do you think these facile generational labels serve to erase what is really the undertone of all these stories, which is white privilege as well?
Well, with respect to millennials, in this particular generation, let me put it this way. I don't think it's a coincidence that our initial mainstream idea of what it meant to be a millennial involved mindless consumption of luxury goods. I mean, painting a whole generation with one brushstroke is inherently disingenuous and dubious, and it's a super convenient way to whitewash narratives that reveal any distressing truths about our society, narratives that speak to issues like racial oppression and class unity. And believing that careless spending is the root of a young generation's struggles, like that absolves the older generations, and especially the wealthiest, of any complicity that they had in making society worse for the next generation to come. You know, and in my article from the Frugalists, I talked about how their story almost feels like two young people telling the wealthy exactly.
In fact, the notices take the exit onto Albert Street towards city centre.
This still works for those.
There's a big market for that, buddy. Ask Thomas Friedman.
Yeah, exactly like Thomas Friedman. You know, I thinking about the profound class divides that have echoed through generations that we see with millennials right now. One of the issues I think a lot about these days, and I'll probably be doing more writing about it in the future, is this going to, how is this going to shape the way in which working people are or are not represented in Congress, for instance, going forward? I mean, as millennials start to, take control of public office here and there, obviously we've seen this tremendous resurgence of, working class grassroots candidates like, obviously Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York. But, ultimately, as long as the cost of running for office remains prohibitive this way, and as long as all this money is thrown at challengers, will the economic makeup of the first millennial Congress be distressingly similar to what it is right now, where most of our elected officials are billionaires for whom this system has ultimately worked, either by virtue of birth lottery or, a few lucky breaks.
That's why I find even the term millennial is just so racialized. You say just close your eyes and think of a millennial. It's this sort of frivolous, white middle class person.
Yeah, I've stopped using it now. I mean, I used to be very forward when I started writing about millennials with, trying to kind of reclaim that term.
Yeah, the thing is, its origins are in marketing, and it's just very telling that its limits are so. Because again, I think it's fine if you discuss it in the context. Like if you qualify for race and class, I don't have a problem with that. But you notice the second you start qualifying for race and class, like again, the millennial couple article, the fact that they own land and make profit off land in one of the most expensive zip codes in the country has to be far, far more relevant than the fact that they were born between 1980 and 2000. Like it has to be, right? And yet one is centered and one is just completely ignored.
There's a really funny thing that happens with some of the Frugalwoods writing that I noticed in Liz's book and on several of the blog posts, which is that, I don't know if you guys saw this from where you looked at, but they are actually very quick to kind of upfront acknowledge their privilege that they have as upper middle class white people. They sort of throw it out as this kind of toss away disclaimer at the beginning of whatever they're about to extol people. And I don't know if there's no term for this yet, but it kind of feels like the economic version of greenwashing. A lot of companies will engage and try to appear conscious of to appear woke, quote unquote.
Well, they're checking their privilege, but they're not accounting for it.
Exactly. That's pretty much it. I mean, that I expect that we'll see that from many more of these personal finance gurus in the months ahead as they try to better engage with millennials and convince them to fork over more money to Infidelity and Charles Schwab.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Miles Howard, writer and editor, whose work has appeared in places like Vice and NBC News, Boston Globe, LA Times, The Nation, and obviously The Outline, where you have written an excellent article on the Frugalwoods. Miles, thank you so much for joining us today on Citations Needed.
Thank you for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
So yeah, that was very, very enlightening. I'm going to say one thing before we go, which is that we are not saying that saving's bad. We're not.
It's actually very good if you can do it.
Blowing all your money on ketamine and CDs is probably not a good idea. You generally want to be frugal on a micro level, but that you're not going to save your way out of poverty in general. It's extremely rare that you should not do the economy based on the exception.
And especially not on bootstrap myths that rely on bootstraps starting all the way in the clouds. And so, to remind our listeners, if you have not listened to our bootstrapism episode, that the origin of the term bootstraps, like pulling oneself up by their bootstraps, comes from the story The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which is a absurdist fictional tale, obviously. But the idea of pulling oneself up by their bootstraps is inherently impossible to do in the story. It's something that literally cannot pull yourself
he's just being an ass.
Because you are weighing yourself down. That is the point of saying that in the story. It has been turned into the ultimate American ethos of success. These aspirational financial advice columns marketed oftentimes at millennials, now they Right, and like
specific, useful concepts.
that these financial advice columns, which are targeted toward people that look like the people they're profiling, that come from the wealth, the people they're profiling wealth come from. Let's remember that saving on coffee in the morning is not going to, alleviate poverty, and that possibly changing the system fundamentally through wealth redistribution or reparations or other ways of completely changing the system are actually the way out.
In 2 kilometers, take the exit onto Albert Street towards city center.
Not just living the frugal wood lifestyle.
Doing little things will not make you richer. Like, for example, stopping your Patreon. That would not help at all.
For instance. And with that, we will end this episode of Citations Needed. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You can follow the show on Twitter at CitationsPod, Facebook Citations Needed, and become a patron of our work through patreon.com/Citations Needed podcast with Nima Shirazi and Adam Johnson. Please do that instead of buying one Starbucks coffee a month. That would be really great.
Stay in the middle lane.
Ow! That hurt. And of course, a very special shout out goes to our critic level supporters through Patreon. They include Aaron Durbin, Ethan Warshow, Alex Peterson, Lorenzo Mitchell, Eric Knight, Max Belanger, Blake Bunell, Nigel Kirby, Chris Sarah, Joe Schmo, David Bettner, Robert Phillips, Andrew Meyer, Kyle Fritz, Ed Citron, Matthew Monahan, Chris Brown, Greg Westmead, Scott Rock.
Take the exit.
It's a nutcase.
Ty Emery, Weed Lord, Zachary Henson. Please upload to Spotify. Chris Vincent, Jonathan Jardy, Esther Bedola.
He didn't give me the finger. He asked me what I was doing.
Lowell Bander, Chris Reese, Jim East.
Well, he was driving in the left lane, so he forced me into a position where I had to make an awkward decision.
Clay Perry, Simon Barrett,
and the decision was, I'm going to pass you in the right and then cut you off. Don't drive in the left lane.
I am Nima Shirazi.
I'm Adam Johnson.
Citations Needed is produced by Florence Burrow Adams. Production consultant is Josh Cross. Production assistant is Trendell Lightburn. This episode
He's gone the wrong way. He missed his turn off. He was so angry. He wanted to give me a piece of his mind. He missed his turn off.
He got it on there. That's good.
Thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you next time.
It's construction, it looks like. We'll probably stay at a hotel somewhere around here. I don't obviously have a hotel booked. I'm just gonna go to this place, plug it in, and we'll just.
Dell is thanking small businesses with up to 45% off select computers with Intel Core processors.
This is gonna be a good one. I'll save it. We'll save it. We'll listen to it tomorrow. Yeah, let them have it. Fight the system. Fight the system.
It's the tone she knows. She's saying it, saying the noise, that's the tone.
Oh, God.
They haven't got roads like this in Winnipeg.
They do.
Where?
This is just like this is.
You mean the perimeter? That's
this
it.
is like their Portage Avenue or their Pembina Highway.
They haven't got the. This is not. This is bigger than Portage Avenue.
I don't think so, Mom.
Oh yes, 4 lanes.
It's 4 lanes in parts on Portage. I would say this road is comparable to Portage Avenue or Pembina Highway, maybe Main Street.
All right, whatever. Car's got a boo-boo, it's got a pink band-aid. Fruits are bloody everywhere.
Yeah, they're moving in.
Taking over. Safeway now is becoming obsolete, isn't it? Where's this park, gas park, petrol place?
I'm just pulling in here, and we're gonna get out and stretch, and then just, maybe I'll walk over to Burger King.
Yeah, Timmy's.
There's a park too, even not
Timmy's.
While we figure out what we do with it, might even stay in that hotel there.
There's green space there, so like a block, probably maybe not.
What is it called?
Oh, I don't know. I forgot what it's called.
Okay. I thought it was a travel lodge, but we can go there. Travel lodge. They got water slides. Yeah, what the hell?
You go to your plug-in now.
It's close to the plug-in area, but.
Yeah, no, the Fairfield. That was it. I'm just going to where the plug-in was, and I just want to get out of the friggin' car.
Yeah. So we'll decide then when we go for a snack.
Actually, this one wasn't too bad. I looked at it online.
Well,
Fairfield.
it's expensive in there.
Oh, they were all about the same, Mom.
No.
I think that's where it was, right?
Well, where is? I don't know where it is, but.
The charger. I think it was at the Fairfield. You said.
$39.15 Albert Street.
Yeah, I can see the number there. 39.15.
And literally, there's a green space, literally like behind, right in the corner of that building over there.
Oh, cool.
It's Proctor Park.
Cool.
You know what to call it? It's kind of green a bit too. Let's go fun. You get it? Let's go for some. Let's go I don't know where it would be. Maybe in the back.
You drive around the back, see there's a park.
Was it? It was just a wall charger, or it was?
I think it was a 177, whatever you call those ones there.
Oh, okay.
Double check.
Oh, there it is there.
Where?
Right there. And of course I'm going to park right in front of
Somebody's
it.
using it.
No, they're just parked right beside it. Well, I don't know why they would park right here, but...
Oh, because it's closer to their door. Or maybe, no, I don't know. Because it's closer to the door. Maybe they work here. Parks all the way in the back. Not like some people, parks right in front of the door and so for visitors. Right?
Yeah.
Walkers is a production of iHeartRadio and Unusual Production.
Munch, we're 5 minutes away from our hotel, Munchie.
Hey, it's Kara. How are you doing?
Are you in a precarious situation?
Not really.
Where are you? Can you say where you are? You sound like you can't talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been working on Sleepwalkers so much. Yeah.
So, I know what you're thinking.
Continue on current road for about 4 kilometers.
That wasn't her speaking.
Oh, there's a Canadian super
We're playing pre-recorded fakes of her voice to her cousin, created by AI.
Are you sleeping? Did I wake you?
I feel so tired.
I'm sorry. I wanted to talk to you about the Who guest list.
I stupidly,
Huh?
I stupidly left my wallet at home. And I need to order tickets to the screening before it sells out.
What screening?
I'm not sure.
Same conversation.
Could you read me your card number real fast? Or text me a pic of your card. I'll Venmo you back.
Look at the house. Your cousin Leslie, right?
She can see
Hello?
it.
Yeah.
I think we're crossing paths here.
Womanie's.
You're answering me in a weird way. Hello?
She's right, you are answering in a weird way.
She hung up on me.
So what was it like hearing Leslie respond to Robot Kara?
Well, it reminded me that it's very easy to prank people when they have no context for what you're doing. It took her like a full minute to be like, oh, Kara's tired. Not like that's not Kara.
You know, sometimes I call my dad and I'll say to him after a minute, Dad, are you playing internet chess?
Well, there is what they call, there's tech brain.
Right.
Which is when someone's...
I guess I can leave it on. Yeah.
It's a hotel.
And that's sort of what it sounds like.
Delta.
She's forgiven Robo Kara. I'm still not off the hook. Sorry.
Fake video can be a lot of fun for pranks, and there are some life-changing positive uses for synthetic media that we'll hear about later. But just how much trouble could deepfakes get us into? And as they get easier to make, how can we keep them out of the hands of the wrong people? I'm Oz Voloshin.
Welcome to Sleepwalkers.
The plan originally was to get Cousin Leslie's credit card detail. That failed.
Yeah, Julian had the idea of having Kara AI ask for credit card information basically to prove how easy it is to get somebody's credit card information. You can imagine if it was a little bit better and you were talking to someone and they were like, oh my god, my grandchild, needs money. Oh my god, my grandchild is in trouble. That they would say, okay, hold on a minute, I'll get you the credit card number. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's what's so frightening about this technology. We're going to dive later into how you synthesized your voice, but it's the same technological underpinning of the video that many people have seen of Jordan Peele basically speaking in Barack Obama's mouth.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. For instance, they could have me say things like, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit.
So that was a computer neural network faking Barack Obama's facial features and mouth movement to literally look like he was speaking the words that Jordan Peele said. And that actually makes it even more persuasive than the fake audio we just heard of your voice. Because when you see something, you tend to believe it. That's why the phrase is...
Seeing is believing.
Thanks, Karen. We're going to come back to deepfakes, but before we get there, we're going to take a look at some other online trickery. Because the scariest part is that fakes actually don't have to be as sophisticated as your call to Cousin Leslie to wreak havoc. This is particularly true on Facebook. So we went to their headquarters in Palo Alto to meet Nathaniel Gleicher. He's the head of cybersecurity policy at Facebook, and he told me about an incident last summer that creates the true dilemma for him and his team.
In July, we conducted a takedown of a fairly small network of pages that were operating in the US, showed links back to Russian actors. And what they were doing was, among other things, creating events where they were inviting Americans to come to protests. And in particular, this was around
when was this province
which happened in 2018.
It was the anniversary of the bloody
Don't know.
crashes
After
in
Manitoba, I
Charlottesville
know
in
that.
2017, and the far right wanted to gather again. This time, Russia was watching.
And there was an event that popped up, which was the No Unite the Right to movement. This was a counter-protest.
There were authentic counter-protests being planned, but this one was being convened by
a group of inauthentic pages and accounts, which were linked back to Russia, that were clearly attempting to sort of bring Americans together in a space where they would go into physical conflict. Immediately after creating the event, they then went out and invited legitimate, unwitting activists to co-host the event with them.
Let's pause for a moment. This is Russia we're talking about, and they're creating a Facebook event to appeal to liberal activists, designed to draw them into physical conflict with the far right, and create the kind of scenes that tear at our social fabric. But the people co-hosting it are not Russian agitators. They're US citizens, acting in good faith.
what we saw in that case, and what we're increasingly seeing, is these actors trying to lure their behavior with domestic actors, to force not just the platforms, but all of us to ask, how do you separate these?
Ultimately, Facebook had to make a decision.
We removed that event because it was created by inauthentic actors. If someone else had created it, that event would have been fine. So we removed the event, but then we reached out to the co-hosts, the authentic hosts, and we explained to them what had happened, and we made clear, if you want to host your own event, you should do that. We just want to make sure that we ever...
In 700 meters, turn right onto Saskatchewan Drive.
Been manipulated in that way.
If you look at reactions, it's a range of sort of disbelief, right? I don't think this was what you're saying it was, to can't believe this happened, to okay, that happened, but I strongly believe in this, and I'm going to go and I'm going to advocate for my issues somewhere else. That spectrum of difficulty is exactly why we see actors use these techniques, because there are no easy answers here.
My assumption going into this was that detecting misinformation would be the biggest challenge for Facebook. But that's the easy part. It's after you identify the fakes that the really tough questions begin.
We know that particularly the government actors in this space, part of their information dominance strategy is to make themselves appear bigger and more powerful than they are. They want to seem like they're everywhere. And it's really easy to see foreign government manipulation under every rock. I think it's really important not to play into the hands of these actors and sort of overplay their own influence. This is a tension we struggle with. Whenever we conduct a takedown, for some of these operations, the most attention it gets is when we take it down.
The entire situation puts Facebook in a catch-22. If they leave the content up, they're helping to promote a foreign government's nefarious agenda. If they take it down, the foreign government gets all this attention for being more powerful and cleverer than they actually are.
These decisions are incredibly hard.
Think of Charlottesville. Think of Pizzagate. Think of Lane Davis, who stabbed his own father after an argument over the conspiracy theory about liberal pedophiles. Fakes can kill, and Facebook has recognized this. For a start, they hired Nathaniel, a former cybercrimes prosecutor in the US Department of Justice. And in March of this year, Mark Zuckerberg announced a company-wide pivot towards privacy and encrypted messaging, including services like WhatsApp.
It probably won't, actually. I didn't realize it's downtown.
Patrick, founder of Takeonomy, notes that the pivot carries its own
It'll
problems.
be a nice hotel, though.
If you look at South Asia, where there's a lot of ethnic discord, political violence, notably in India, Indonesia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka.
In 300 meters, turn right onto Saskatchewan Drive.
Messages in WhatsApp. People in the U.S. don't typically use WhatsApp for group messages, but in places like India and Indonesia, they do.
And these groups aren't 5 or 6 people, your parents and your brother and sister, these are bigger groups.
These are like you subscribe to a political leader or a religious zealot.
So this is more like the dear leader being piped into your home.
Right. So the problem has been almost more severe in those systems than on Facebook itself of fake news and ethnic hatred being disseminated, because WhatsApp is a encrypted service. So the service itself can't even see what the messages are that are being distributed.
What's scary is it doesn't take any technical sophistication or knowledge on the part of people writing these messages, spreading this misinformation. They're just using WhatsApp.
Yeah, and these are just messaging apps and social media platforms.
But what they mean is that a single message can spread like wildfire. And of course the history of new communication technology tends to go hand in hand with violence. When the printing press, i.e. books, came to Europe, they unleashed religious wars, but they also made the world literate.
And we've mentioned this before, technology is usually dual use, which relates back to deepfakes.
Mostly when you read about deepfakes, probably thanks in part to the fact that they're called deepfakes, and that the coverage is not very positive.
There have been more and more stories, though, about positive uses for deepfakes. So when we come back, I'm going to tell you more about how I faked my own voice and also some of the things that I learned in the process.
There's nothing small about your business. Your impact on the community.
Turn right onto Saskatchewan Drive.
We're a small business month. Dell is offering 45% off select computers with Intel Core processors.
In 700 meters, the destination is on your right.
Visit today. That's 877-BUY-DELL for tech, advice, and one-on-one partnership.
We started this conversation a few weeks ago, and then you asked us to create this artificial voice based on your identity.
That's Jose Sotelo, the co-founder of Lyrebird. They're the company who made Robot Kara and Help Me Prank My Cousin. And they've published a version of their tools online at lyrebird.ai. Here's how it works.
I know it might sound a bit like magic, but in reality, the way that our algorithms work is basically they are just pattern matching algorithms. And so it's trying to figure out how to identify the patterns in your voice by comparing it against thousands of other voices, actually tens of thousands of other voices, and trying to figure out what is it that makes your voice unique.
Once Jose's algorithms identified what was unique about my voice, obviously everything, they had the building blocks they needed to make a fake. Then we sent
You have arrived at your destination. Your route guidance is finished.
Algorithms to turn the text into what we heard. The way they do this is they use what's called a generative adversarial network, a GAN, which is a system where one neural one tries to trick another one 1,000 times per second.
Because I'm going to be taking my phone.
This process.
I may need the CAA card.
Oh, yeah.